let me click that on. So thanks everybody for joining us on this for the session 4 on availability. We have several of our panelists with us today, and I want to cover those now. So I'm going to let them quickly introduce themselves. So Edwin, if you don't mind, please, with Veeam, please introduce yourself and let us know what you do there at Veeam.
Yeah, thanks, Ted. Edwin Weijdema. I'm a global technologist for Veeam. I'm part of the office of the CTO. Been in business for 29 years now and working for Veeam for just over 5 years. I'm focused on cybersecurity, so yeah, that's also the invite. Been asked by many organizations or consulted by many organizations who are afraid of being hit by ransomware or have been hit by ransomware. And then I try to do expectation management, help them control the human part of the ransomware attacks.
Excellent, thank you. And Bridget, I'm going to toss it back over to you. You've been very gracious about participating in our series, so I'll let you do a quick introduction.
Yeah, it's been a pleasure participating. So my background is legal, insurance, and consulting. So right now I am the director of IR at Booz Hamilton. And before that time, I've worked as general counsel of different digital forensic companies. I have worked in cyber claims at various insurance carriers, and I've litigated in private practice.
Excellent. Thank you for that. I appreciate it. So, and Philip, I'm going to toss it over to you with NetFoundry. If you can give us a little background on yourself, please.
Yes, Dad. So Philip, based out of Cambridge in the UK. I look after our global business development inside NetFoundry, helping organizations to reduce their threat vector from ransomware and other such things.
Excellent, appreciate it. And Bryan with Oracle, if you can introduce yourself and give us a little background, please.
Okay, I'm Bryan Grenn. I am a database specialist here at Oracle. I specialize in backup and recovery, and I work with a lot of our bigger customers. And probably for like the last year, it's been cyber, it's been the big concentration. That's what everyone is worried about.
Excellent, thank you, Bryan. So, Bridget, I'm going to toss it over to you first and see from your work there at Booz Allen Hamilton and just your background, from what are y'all dealing with customers concerning their availability concerns in dealing with ransomware?
Well, typically what we're seeing is that most people have an incident response plan. Most people haven't tested it.
Right.
So we've seen that, they might not even have it printed out and they might have an encrypted system. So we see a lot of people wanting to invest in it, but not taking the right steps. And one thing that I would, just like the availability of your backups, you test your backups to see if they are in the condition you need them to be in to recover. The same thing goes for your incident response. So it's truly a corporate crisis and you have to treat it accordingly. So the things that these folks really need and find oftentimes too late is an understanding of who's making the decisions, a real contextualization of what happens during an incident, particularly a ransomware incident, and what are the other tentacles of things that could happen, right? So if you have a ransomware event and your bank cuts you off, what are you gonna do? I don't know. These are the things that you really have to plan for. And, it even goes down to the media. If the bad guys leak something to the media and you have reporters calling your employees, what are you going to do? That's hard to make a good decision in a crisis situation. It's hard to make a logical, well thought out decision in a crisis situation. So beyond the technical wherewithal to respond, you need an operational and a legal wherewithal and thought out process for all the things, all the pressure points and things that could happen collaterally during one of these events.
No, excellent. Thanks for that. I appreciate it. So Edwin, I know y'all are one of the leaders in enterprise backup and recovery, and work with a lot of customers. And y'all also, I've seen a lot of Veeam papers on ransomware. So what what is your approach with customers, and how do you primarily guide them around best practices concerning availability when it comes to ransomware?
Yeah, there's also what Bridget was already talking about, that incident response plan, but I would take it a little bit bigger. Not just about the backup, it's the whole thing. It's not an IT problem, it's a business problem. So how we approach that is about a cybersecurity defense strategy. Make a strategy, make sure that you have multiple things in play. And my architectural background takes me always to people, process, and technology. And those three are in harmony. If you just focus on one, you lost the battle right out of the gate. So focus on those three. But you don't have unlimited money. That's also the one thing I get back. Okay, I have this pot of money. What can I do with it? I always ask them to go and look at their employees. How are they trained? Often you hear awareness, but awareness itself is not enough, because that's the same what we're doing. If we're educating people and next week it's already gone, you have to also do exercise. That incident response plan, make sure that it's being practiced. So what I do when I come into a company that asks me for consultation about ransomware because they are afraid or have been hit and they don't want to be hit again, is okay, let's start from scratch. Nobody can touch any digital system anymore. So no phone, no computer in that building. And then someone comes in with a card, just a physical card, saying, okay, you have been hit by ransomware, just going to the receptionist, and let's play it from there. And then you will see that a lot of people in that organization will panic. That's the natural response, because we have some things, some people flee, some people panic, some people freeze. But the good thing is that's a natural thing, and people shouldn't be worried about it. But if you have practiced it before, that's the same what we do with fire drills. What do we do by fire drills? We practice them. So people know what their responsibilities are. So if that call comes in, okay, you have been hit by ransomware, people will know who to reach out to, who will take that call to the news and the media, who will respond to that. Because those the first 48 hours of a ransomware attack are crucial. You don't want to give too much information to the outside world, especially not because those ransomware or the cyber attackers have no clue they hit you. Often it's a drive-by, but as soon as they see that there's something popping up in the media, they know, wait a minute, that's an interesting topic. Or you have been particularly targeted, then they will know. But most are in just a drive-by shooting, let me say it like that.
Right, no, excellent point. Appreciate it, Edwin. So Philip, let me throw it over to you there at NetFoundry. What are y'all's, what's your primary guidance for customers concerning availability when it comes to ransomware?
Yeah, it links a lot to what Nick was mentioning at the front, which is how do we harden our systems in the first place so that they're less likely to be breached. One of the examples that we've recently been working on with Oracle is how you can put private zero trust inside the API for your database, the JDBC. And this means that you can create, as Nick was saying, your Oracle database on MySQL, which is completely private and unaddressable on the public internet. So just the initial attack vectors of ransomware aren't possible. And then it is only accessible to trusted participants that are likewise part of the private zero trust overlay, but where it is effectively a clientless solution for them, because they need to use that API anyway. So they just have an API that's embedded with zero trust. It's almost like taking the MFA and the restricted access to the console and the availability on the network and putting it on steroids so that you can massively reduce the initial attack surface, but do it in a way that is very simple for the data administrators, for the business intelligence people, for the people that are effectively the users of the database.
Yeah, great point, Philip. I appreciate it. Yeah, and that's some specific guidance that I think, again, we're trying to help our attendees know, what are some of the specific things that you can do, and so that's helpful. So Bryan Grenn with Oracle, let me throw it over to you. What are you observing customers doing in this area to address their needs around availability?
Well, what I'm saying it's partly what Philip talked about is, protecting the database and trying to, keep that safe and secure. But part of it is backups, and part of it is preparing for something if something happens. And to kind of lead from what Nick said is customers are concerned not only about the system that got attacked. So if they find that a database or the server's been hacked, they're concerned about what else is sitting out there dormant. That seems to be the big concern with a lot of the bigger customers is, I found one thing, but did I find everything? Is that all there is out there? And what customers are looking at doing is quarantining systems and possibly even quarantining the whole data center, is kind of taking a look at what do we do if something attacks one of the systems, we find that, what do we lock down and what do we do? That's where, availability comes in. Maybe I go to my DR site and maybe I shut down this data center. And then before I restore and recover, maybe I rebuild the server from scratch. I reinstall the firmware. I get a copy of everything that I know is good, has not been attacked. And that is my starting point to be absolutely sure that what I am restoring from is going to be good and it's not going to get me back to where I started. It's kind of looking at that big picture and having the plan that puts all of that together and thinking about, okay, now that I'm encrypting to protect it from exfiltration, now where are those encryption keys? Am I going to be able to get those keys back? Where am I backing those up? There's a lot to think about, because the more you put in place to complicate your protection, the more complicated it is to rebuild and restore.
Yeah, no, that's an excellent point, Bryan. I appreciate it. So, okay, those are all good insights, and I absolutely agree with, I think one of the primary points there is just around testing, right? You really have to have more than just a process. You have to put it to the test. You have to practice it, just as, Edwin talked about with fire drills, et cetera. And Bridget, you need to put those to use. So, we're coming at this from a cyber insurance perspective as well. So Bridget, I'm going to come back to you and ask you from, being with Booz Allen and working with the indemnifiers, the cyber insurance companies, et cetera, what do you see as what their expectations are or maybe are going to become around availability for ransomware incidents?
So what we're seeing now, a big trend going forward, is the carriers more and more, and by operation of the policy, are going to want to be notified and give consent on everything you're doing. So you're really going to have to work in your incident response plan. You might want to, hire this person or want this person. But if you want the availability of coverage of the indemnifier, you have to use who they want. And trust me, they have good people there, right? They have people who do it day in and day out and very seasoned. So the consent of the insurers is going to be crucial. But honestly, it's just another work stream. So it's going to have to be worked into your operational plan. Your outside counsel, who may be appointed by the carrier, has to be aware of that. And what I would recommend everyone do, go home today, print out a copy of your policy and read it, because a lot of them are they're not in typical insurance ease. And you'll find you're like, ooh, before I made that payment to the threat actor, should I have gotten consent? Should I have gotten the approval of the carrier? Before I hired, this person or that person, did I need the consent of the carrier? And, oftentimes in a crisis, they don't have anyone available, they'll consent. It's something to work out beforehand. It goes back into the preparation and testing that we spoke of earlier, but it's really a trend going forward because more and more the carriers are going to want to control where this is going because they handle thousands of these a year. So they've seen more of this than anyone on your team has. And they do bring that perspective. So having them shouldn't be adversarial. It should be a partner with a really great perspective, but know what the limitations of the policy are and know what you need to, mother may I from the carrier before you go and do it, because you want that coverage to be available.
No, that's great. And speaking of that, Bridget, I'd like your insight on, there's now, a cloud environment. Some organizations are choosing to back up to the cloud. Some are still choosing to do offsite backups. Some are doing a combination of that, et cetera. I'm just interested in seeing what do y'all typically advise with the varying environments around what an organization is trying to do from an availability standpoint?
We don't recommend just one thing. The needs of and budgets of different corporations might yield different results. Joe's Donut Shop might just be once every 2 weeks, manually backed up to a hard drive, and that might be okay for Joe's Donut Shop, but for complicated networks, they might need something different and typically do. What the insurance carriers are going to look for is something they're going to want something air gapped, and they're going to want to see controls around it. And they're going to want to see some solution that shows them that you have tested, available, offline backups should something befall. Like it could just be some sort of network issue that your network crashes. Okay. Is there a digital twin around that you can roll up and start working and keep your business going? Is that available? So that's really what they're looking for. What we recommend a blend of all sorts of things. There's different, for different folks, there are different strokes. What the prime objective is to have a backup available that you can quickly recover from and suits all the business needs.
Yeah, no, good point. And I've also worked with y'all, which is one reason, we lean on y'all a lot because there's also privacy concerns when you back up, right? And so you have to ensure that where you're backing that data up to, if it's in the cloud, et cetera, stays within a specific region that you have, basically consent in order to store that data based on the privacy of the individuals. So it's just something else to consider as well for the cloud. But yeah, good points, Bridget. Edwin, I'm going to toss it over to you. I'm going to pose the same question to you. I know y'all work with customers that are backing up to the cloud, doing offsite storage, et cetera. How does Veeam go about dealing with customers and guiding them in those efforts?
We use the 3-2-1-1-0 rule. So the 3-2-1 is commonly known now, fortunately. Not everyone is following it yet, but 3 copies of data, 2 different media, 1 is offsite. But we also did 1 extra 1 and a 0. And the 1 is being immutable, being offline, making sure that you have that secure backup, that you have something to go back to, that it hasn't been modified, that hasn't been altered, that not being redirected somewhere. And that 0 is about the testing. And the testing is the most important part. That's also why I say to customers, make sure you test your backups, not just a random restore. So we did a restore last week, so we tested the backups. No, make it sure that you do that like daily or weekly for a random set of workloads you're doing. As long as you do that and you know that that process is going, so that's also why you have to put it into your whole process chain, making sure that you have that in place, but also making sure that immutable is not just the holy grail. It's just protecting you against modifying and deletion, but it's not protecting you against extracting data, because that what Nick already told about is that whole data set contains the whole copy of your virtual data center. So there's gold in there. So you want to encrypt that data also and make sure that it's on different locations. But also what I say, pay someone and trust that someone to keep it safe. That means that no one from your organization can touch that backup anywhere. So there could be in a public cloud, could be a tape that's going to a physical vault somewhere. So you have different means. And that's also what we do in Veeam, is we give you freedom of choice. Because what Bridget was also talking about, everyone has different needs, but also a different budget. So depending on what your budget is, we work with them and see how we can get that 32110 rule in place on their budget, but also making sure that they are compliant and that they have a secure backup.
Yeah, that's excellent. I love the word immutable. And I think, you know, one of the things that Nick brought up and you've touched on as well, and is, you know, one of my largest concerns is that the data, you know, if you go to recover, are you recovering any data that may have been altered or changed, or have they inserted anything, et cetera? How do y'all, I mean, you mentioned encryption. Encryption, it definitely helps in knowing if someone has worked to alter that offline system, et cetera. But how do y'all go about at Veeam ensuring that you know, what you're recovering has not been altered or manipulated?
Making sure those timestamps are correct, and also making sure that you have. I often get the questions, I only need 3 days of backups, because after that, after ransomware attack, I don't have to restore, because it's not valuable anymore to restore a backup that's older than 1 month or 3 months even. But I tell them you need to have long-term retentions to help in forensics. Check if that backup compared to the other backup, what did change? So a forensics party loves us because we have multiple retention points. You can just go back in time and see where it went off the rail, because normally it's about 6 months that the organizations are already being breached and those criminals are in the infrastructure. So you want to have some point in time that you can compare to make sure that the encrypted party, where did it go wrong and what did go wrong? And we also have some comparing things, especially about Active Directory, that we can compare to snapshots of Active Directory and see what changed. Because often you will see that there is another extra admin account popping up somewhere and that they didn't notice about. But that's that's the thing where a forensics party can start their trail. Look where that thing came from and then look through the entry points. Is it an internal thing? Is it just about money? Because that's the easy one and also the least scary one, because if it has a private or personal motive behind it, it means it's an insider threat or someone that left the company and has a grudge. And that's the hard part, to fight that off. Because then normally it's not just being encrypted for money, but there's more things going on. You have to do forensics really carefully.
Yeah, I totally agree. And I really hope our participants are hearing what you and Nick and Bridget and the other panelists are drawing out. The evolution of these ransomware attacks, in my personal opinion, is that they are going to look to change data. I've mentioned this before on my previous webinars. They're going to alter and change your offline systems, or even if it's you know, even if it's in a production system, to change your data and to try to understand how the data has been changed and not recover improper data, if you will, is very difficult. And that needs to be a part of your process. And I won't belabor that anymore, but I do hope all of our participants, I hope your organizations are putting thought into that, because if you're not, the attackers are. And imagine an attacker that has said, you know what, I've been in your system for 3 months or for a period of time, and I have altered your data accordingly over that time. And do you know what I've altered? And if you want to set your systems back to a proper state, then you're going to have to pay me a ransom to do that. Look, we don't have to be a genius to figure out that that's going to, for a lot of these attackers, that's going to be a natural evolution of this. And I have personally observed that with organizations that can be much more damaging than just paying a ransom. where you actually are making business decisions, et cetera, on improper data. So anyway, excellent point, Edwin. You got me on my soapbox a little bit, but it's a great point. So Philip, I'm going to throw it over to you. As I was talking about, customers are dealing with, organizations are dealing with the cloud, with offline storage, with production systems. We have this whole hybrid environment where we've got their data centers, the cloud, and maybe even third parties. Can you talk a little bit about how does NetFoundry? I know one of the things y'all do specifically is y'all are really good at working to prevent lateral movement. Y'all do work to prevent infection, period. But if someone is infected, you work diligently to prevent that lateral movement. Maybe you can talk a little bit about that, because I hear a lot of customers saying, if my data center is infected, how do I maybe prevent that from propagating up into my cloud?
Yeah, it's a very good question. And in fact, it relates quite nicely to a customer conversation we were having recently, which was an organization in a very high security environment. So they'd moved all of their applications to the cloud, but all of their databases were on premise. And then they were thinking, well, how do we securely connect it? How do we resolve that problem that you just exactly set out? How do we ensure if one environment gets compromised, or ideally we stop that in the first place, but then how do we stop that lateral movement? And for me, this is one of the core tenets of Zero Trust. That's not even from a technology perspective, that's from an architectural perspective, from a philosophical perspective around how you build application-specific networks using least privileged access, so that just because someone gets access to one thing doesn't mean they can laterally move into anything else. It's the fallacy of the VPN, where people say, oh, I've now got a secure network. Well, you haven't. You've basically said, I trust this side and I trust this side, and you're doing encryption between those two things. But then you're able to laterally move. And we've seen it, clonal pipelines, which was mentioned at the start of, where people started really becoming super concerned about ransomware. That was from a VPN, and someone's been able to just move through the network and laterally move around. Fundamentally, the easiest way to restrict this is to move into a methodology where you are doing application microsegmentation, where you're implementing least privilege, and therefore, even if, God forbid, someone does somehow get a foothold, which again you can reduce with private Zero Trust itself, then at least they cannot just go into your crown jewels and get as much information, encrypt things, and do malicious things. It becomes way harder. And then ideally, an organization just figures out, there's easier people to attack. I'll move on. I think Nick was saying, a big focus is where people just sit and they observe and they try to figure out where is the easiest person for me to attack. If you just make that first initial part harder, then hopefully they'll move on from you.
Yeah, excellent. No, good point, Phil. Appreciate it. So, Bryan, let me throw it back over to you. I know you're with Oracle, and Oracle has their own cloud, and they have their own hardware, and they of course have their own database and applications, and they deal with customers that are in this hybrid environment of their data centers, the clouds, et cetera. How do you see, and how do you assist customers with their backup and availability requirements in that type of an environment?
Well, on-prem, we have an appliance that was built specifically to back up Oracle databases, and to protect from ransomware as much as we can. We do internal validation to make sure that everything that it stores is, valid Oracle blocks. It does restore, validate periodically to make sure that what is stored within it is going to be able to recover, and checks for gaps for anything that's missing. But, like you mentioned, if it's data itself that is touched and it, is still valid data, but somebody got into the database with credentials, that is the hardest thing to detect. So, that's what we're seeing customers do on-prem. And in the cloud, they're backing up to an object store, and, we're making that immutable. So they're protecting their backups there. And customers are also taking backups that are on-prem and then pushing them up to the cloud and kind of help them prepare for the migration or possibly have that as a DR location. And eventually get to the point where, you know, it's a combination of maybe my primary is sitting on-prem, my DR is in the cloud, and then that's going to be my plan to go there live, or at least have my backups there. So if I need to go there, it's primed and it's ready to go. And the backups are protected and separated.
Okay, excellent, excellent. So what I'd like to do is I'm going to do a quick round of final thoughts from our panelists, and then I'm going to jump it back over to Nick and let we have a couple of questions, Nick, for you that I'm going to throw your way. And so, but before I do that, let me come back to the panelists. Bridget, I'll start with you first. And just one, thank you for participating in the 4-part series. It's very kind of you and Booz Allen to do this. And I want to see, what are your final thoughts? One, about just availability and overall the ransomware in general, and what your final thoughts and suggestions for our participants are.
So broadly, we're seeing the ransomware threat actors are evolving and evolving quickly. So if you and your organization are in a static state and are not evolving with them, and I'm not saying buying the best technology or anything like that, but evolving with your operations and how you're managing the risk, you're likely to get hit. So move with the risk. I know it's a moving target, which is why you buy insurance and you have a risk transfer, but there are very measurable, easy steps to take. It just has to be thought out, invested in, and completed. So that is what I would say. It's a real risk, it's an evolving risk, and it's something that you really have to invest time into.
Yeah, no, excellent, Bridget. So thank you for that. And again, I know you don't plug Booz Allen, but if anybody, y'all are one of the leading advisors on ransomware. So if you're struggling with getting advisement on this, I highly recommend y'all reach out to Bridget or with Booz Allen. So thank you for participating. So Edwin, let me throw it across the pond over to you. Again, half of our panelists today are coming in from Europe, so we really appreciate it. Edwin, what are your final thoughts and suggestions and kind of the key takeaways that you need our participants to know from today?
Yeah, you have to think about the whole thing about ransomware is those bad actors only have to have it right once, and you as a defender have to have it right every time. That's impossible. So think about it. But also, if I look at organizations that have been helping the last couple of years, everyone designed their infrastructure for backup. That's a good thing, because that was the thing to do 5 years ago, because we had 100% backup because we needed the backup to go to, but we only did like 5% restores. Now with all those ransomware attacks, you need 100% backup, but you also need 100% restore capabilities. So make sure that your infrastructure is capable of restoring 100% of your workloads and data. So start redesigning and thinking about your process, but also your infrastructures, that they can accommodate a full restore within time. So it's faster than paying a ransom. And it's also cheaper than paying a ransom.
Yeah, exactly. No, excellent suggestion and good takeaway. So Philip, you're coming from Cambridge, is also over across the pond. So let me throw it your way. What are your key takeaways and final thoughts you want to leave the participants with?
Yeah, I think what Edwin just mentioned was something that I also like to really keep in mind, which is the whole point of, if you're going to be safe, you need to be safe 100% of the time, and the hackers only need that one time. And through the mega trends that we have, cloud, IoT, mobile, distributed systems, we are using the internet more and more, and the internet is not designed to be safe. It's designed to share. And some of the core tenets to enable us to do that more effectively, to reduce our attack surface so that the likelihood of the ransomware and malicious people getting in is much reduced, is to be able to make everything private, to utilize the frameworks and philosophies of zero trust. You can start small. You can focus on your crown jewels. Ultimately, it's a journey, but you need to start taking that journey, because if you ignore it, you will ultimately become one of the, what is it now, every 11 seconds organizations that get ransomware, and you don't want to be in that group. So start small.
Yeah, excellent point. So yeah, thanks, Philip, for that. I appreciate it. And so Bryan, with Oracle, I'm gonna throw it over to you. What are your key takeaways and closing thoughts for people concerning ransomware availability?
I'm going to go back to Edwin's second talk about being able to restore and looking at your infrastructure for restore. Because a lot of times, databases are getting bigger and bigger. They're getting into hundreds of terabytes. And customers, all they've thought about is, okay, my clients are accessing it and my backups take 3 days. I'll worry about that later. But when it goes time to restore, sometimes you need to build your infrastructure for the restore and meeting your SLAs. It's not just the client, it's being able to restore and recover and meeting those SLAs. You need to think about that up front and make sure you have the infrastructure to do that.
Yeah, no, excellent point. So, and thank you for that, Bryan. I appreciate it. And so we did get a question I want to address before I throw it back over to Nick and with Gartner, who's going to close us out. But so Cynthia asked a psychological question. How do you deal with the panic that coworkers feel when ransomware notification is received at the company? And I'm going to go back to what Bridget and Edwin had mentioned about, and even Nick about this, that it's the same way I think you deal with the panic concerning a fire. Yes, you have a policy, but then you test that and you practice it and you drill for it so that when you have a real fire, then hopefully people do not panic. They've been through the process before. They know, everyone knows what their swim lane is and what their position is to do, and then they'll act accordingly. Yes, there will always be some people probably that panic, but maybe you can minimize that. And I think, having drills and going through this and testing, again, we kept hearing that come out from the panelists a multitude of times. Yes, have a policy, as Bridget said, and I thought it was very well stated. Think about your policy in terms of the cyber insurance companies as well, and how that will resonate with them. And then most importantly, test that backup and recovery policy as well, and put it into action. So let me pause here and I'll stop